Okay, so mindfulness. I'll be honest, this word gets a little bit old seeing it everywhere, all online. It's talked about in a lot of books. It's talked about in a lot of yoga studios, meditation, social media posts. It is everywhere. And now it's even caught on with this whole demure TikTok whole thing. And it cracks me up. But let me break it down for you. As a front load of this video, the short answer of why mindfulness is so important in our lives is it literally is the foundational teaching, the foundational virtue, the foundational practice that allows us to cease causing conflict and suffering in our lives, as well as cease causing conflict and suffering in other people's lives. But what the heck does that mean, and how do we go about doing it? Well, I got some tips ahead for you, so stay tuned. Howdy everyone, Alaric Hutchinson here, also known as the Zen Cowboy, coming at you from Durango, Colorado. And today I wanted to share more about my #1 passion in life, which is combining Eastern philosophy with modern psychology, developing this psycho-spiritual approach to therapy that helps us heal our karmic, repeating patterns of suffering and conflict in our lives. And I love it so much, I wrote a book about it, which came out earlier this year, June of 2024, called Heart of Humanity, An Introduction to the Healing Path of Dunisha. And so today I'm going to be talking about the virtue of mindfulness, which is the first of 9 virtues I teach my students and clients, and of course I'm now introducing in this book. So let's go ahead and jump right in, shall we? To start, let's go ahead and take a breath. Delicious. And let me show you real quick. At the beginning of this section, I actually have a cute little bee on a flower with the statement, let's take a breath, ... And these little breaths are scattered throughout the book because not only in our everyday lives and just waking day-to-day moments, but also when we're reading, it's so easy to just jump from one thing to the next thing to the next thing without actually pausing and allowing us to soak in the moment and marinate in it for a moment, allowing us to actually absorb whatever is going on around us. The flower image is actually specific to this section as well because I call the Dunisha virtues the flowers of awakening. And I just wanted to share a little snippet about it before we go into the virtues. We call Dunisha virtues the flowers of awakening, named for the blossoming nature of flowers and of ourselves. When certain conditions align, the flower buds and blooms. When the conditions are not present, neither is the flower. However, even though we may not see buds, the potentiality of the flower still exists within the plant, and the same applies to enlightenment, or rather, the self-actualization of our potential virtues. So moving forward into the series of the 9 virtues I'll be talking about, I really am inviting us all to imagine them as flowers. And just because a flower blooms one day does not mean it's going to bloom every single day from henceforth, and the same applies to the virtues. We may be really mindful or diligent or honest one day, but in the next day, we're the opposite of those things. And it's not so much a matter of beating ourselves up or getting discouraged. It's just recognizing that there are certain things we can do each and every day that are nurturing the soil, that is giving us the appropriate amount of sunlight and water, and all these components coming together that allows the flower, the virtue, to bloom in our lives. I don't know, I just thought that was a clever analogy, and I think it really helps us put in perspective that this is not just, okay, I'm gonna achieve and unlock mindfulness within myself, and for forevermore, I'm this master of it. And that's bullshit. Even for someone like myself that's been practicing for over 20 years, I got my moments, I got my days, I got my weeks. And so even if I'm 60 or 70 or 80 years old, it's still something that I would have to be practicing each and every day, not just thinking that it's a milestone to cross, and then from that moment on, we're good. Let's take one more breath. If you'd like to read along, it's page 95, Virtue 1, the Flower of Mindfulness. Let's begin by briefly exploring the opposite of mindfulness. An easy answer would be mindlessness, but that word isn't very attractive. Few of us would eagerly claim we live mindlessly each day. However, what we may fess up to more readily is that we can easily become mentally or emotionally distracted. And when that happens, hours, days, and even weeks seem to pass by without our notice. These distractions may be stress in the home or at work, emotionally taxing relationships, mental states of worry, and any number of modern dopamine fueling stimulations that make us feel good or allow us to be entertained temporarily. When we defined, quote, mindlessness, end quote, as being, quote, easily diverted by distractions, end quote, it's easier to acknowledge that mindlessness occurs in all our lives. Okay, real talk. This whole mindlessness thing is really, really crucial to lean into and understand. Never before in human history, or at least known human history, have we been able to be distracted 24/7, able to be entertained and dopamine-fueled 24/7, thanks to these little devices that we now carry in all of our pockets, or most of our pockets, the smartphones, that allows us to be plugged in 24/7 to not only other people, but an unlimited supply of entertainment. And not only that, but social media specifically is actually designed to be addictive. So we're getting these little hits of dopamine, and all these hits are coming from our constant context switching. And what that means is that our attention is being switched. The moment we pay attention to 2 to 10 seconds of one video or one thing we're reading, and then it switches to another, and then another, and then another. And this is all actually depleting our ability to concentrate and to focus. So this is quite the opposite of mindfulness. And I will say that if this is something you struggle with, then chances are you probably also struggle with mindfulness, because they go hand in hand. And the number one thing to actually help us cultivate mindfulness is taking time away from constant stimulation, taking time away from constant mental stimulation, and being alone with ourselves, actually meditating, or even going back to a good old book and just reading. Because when we're just reading one thing for an extended amount of time, that is not context switching. That is allowing our mind to get into a flow state. So pretty cool stuff. That's just a little introduction to the unique issues that we're facing right now in our society in the digital age. Another breath. Being able to recall our mind to the present moment is akin to a superpower. Bringing the mind into the present grants us immense freedom. We gain the ability to choose what's next instead of reacting on impulse or emotion or to the habitual patterns of the mind. This power of mindfulness is the first virtue we cultivate in Dunisha, and it corresponds with the tenet mastery of thought. But what does it actually mean for the mind to be present? When the mind is not rehashing the past, imagining the future, or fixated on today's drama, it is in the present. It is alert, receptive, unfettered, and free. When we are not in the present, these, quote, absent habits of thought drain us of the finite resource of lifetime, the X amount of time we each have in which to live fully. Thus, mindfulness has another definition in Dunisha, the, quote, waking up, end quote, to our aliveness. So when we're being distracted, maybe by social media, maybe by the dramas and the scenarios playing out in our mind because we got triggered by something and we're constantly gnawing on it, or we're worrying about loved ones in our life, or worrying about work, any number of things, we're either glued to some screen physically, or we're glued to some screen in our mind's eye that's actually keeping us from being present. Our surroundings might be actually quite peaceful, but the movie reel that we're playing in our mind, not so much. So mindfulness, the virtue of mindfulness that we learn to cultivate with the myriad of teachings that I talk about in Heart of Humanity, literally allows us to gain agency over our mind. When we take time, even if it's just 5 minutes for meditation, which I'll be going on to a whole video section on that in the future, but when we do practices such as mindfulness techniques or meditation techniques every day, it gives us the ability to be present. It gives us the ability to respond rather than react to the stimuli going on in our life. And when we gain that ability to respond rather than react, and we're really in tune with our body and the emotions coming up, because normally when we have an emotion, it leads to reaction. When we have those pauses, when we have those breaths, it completely changes the direction of the energy, or rather it allows us to change the direction of the energy that we're putting forth into the world. So without mindfulness, we're not able to be mindful of our speech, of the thoughts and the narratives going on in our mind, of our behaviors, of the choices we're making, of our emotions that in a lot of ways we actually are choosing to fuel. So mindfulness is the root foundation that allows us to nurture habits of peace, habits of compassion, habits of response rather than reaction. So I love this because it's literally returning us to our aliveness in the moment rather than being zombie-like, to where anytime we have any sense of boredom, we just go right to our smartphones and we get distracted. And what happens there is if we're always distracted 24/7, then when issues actually arise at a future time, we're not being prepared. We have not trained our mindfulness muscles, our focus, our concentration muscles to be alert enough to actually handle those conflicts with grace, to handle those conflicts with a mindful response rather than a reaction. And I tell you what, this is something I've really played with and worked with in my own life. And if I'm filling my day with mindless habits, and it's so much easier to see how more reactive I am to issues in my life versus if I'm even just spending maybe 5 to 15 to 20 minutes a day nurturing some kind of mindfulness, some kind of focus, some kind of meditative routine that allows us to return, that allows me to return to my body. Very curious. Let's breathe that in. With breath as our anchor, pausing to concentrate on the intake and release of it, we're able to return to our aliveness in each moment. Mindfulness teaches us to recall, to return and remember. When only, quote, this moment, end quote, contains life, it is all we need to foster peace, healing, joy, and beneficial change that guides the trajectory of our life. In summary, the virtue of mindfulness is what allows us to cultivate every other virtue. Without our presence in this moment, how can we ever become intentional with our thoughts, words, or actions? Let me emphasize that. Without mindfulness, how can we ever become intentional with our thoughts, words, or actions? Mindfulness is the taproot that grounds and grants us the nutrients necessary to become strong, active participants in the creation and continued recreation of our desired reality. And that right there is a juicy teaching I'll be covering in another future video. How to become more active participants in the creation of our reality. So that is the virtue of mindfulness in a nutshell. I know that was super short, super brief, and it's something that is so simple to talk about, but it's actually can be quite a challenge to put into practice. And what we're doing in this video with just taking those breaths at different moments of pause, I actually do in conversations all the time. And that's my ability to be, that cultivates my ability to be more mindful. So if something triggering comes up or something, I need to respond to a question that might be a little more deep, I actually say, hey, can you give me a moment? Let me breathe that in. Or even when I facilitate weddings, I will actually add breaths throughout the ceremony so that the couple grounds themselves and everyone there in the audience grounds themselves and can enjoy the moment just a little bit more. And the last wedding I did almost a year ago, I had about 10 people, maybe even 15, come up to me after the ceremony and say, holy cow, thank you for those breaths. It just really allowed me to either allow the emotions welling up within me or release them or just come back to the moment and enjoy the ceremony. And it was just so interesting how all these people were thanking me for just breathing when it was the simplest thing, but it's something we constantly forget to do on a daily basis. And really a breath is just a synonym for coming back to the present moment and grounding ourselves into this moment so that we can touch our aliveness and respond rather than react. Let's take a breath. So that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up, and I would love it if you would subscribe. That way we get more of the ball rolling on this channel. And I always like to remind people too that I do work with folks one-on-one through Zoom and phone sessions, or if you're local, in person, www.zencowboy.org. And if you do get a session with me, you're helping me pay for my master's degree. So thank you. It's quite expensive. So it is wonderful to be able to do this work and to share it with y'all, and I am having so much fun at creating these videos. And if there's questions you'd like me to explore in future videos, I'll go ahead and put them down below, or even send me a private email with them, and I will try to wiggle them into future videos where they would correspond well. Thank you all so much, and have a beautiful week. Mwah.